Let's just wait a few minutes so people can get in the room.
Já está aberto para as pessoas, Ernesto?
Sim, já tem 30 pessoas. E já está no Facebook também.
Ah, ok.
Boa tarde a quem está entrando. Vamos esperar só alguns minutinhos para entrar todo mundo e a gente começar o evento. Bom, podemos começar? Vocês acham? Já.
Sim.
Acho que sim, né? Bom, so just say it no. I'm just going to introduce the whole thing in Portuguese, and then the rest of it is going to be in English, okay?
Yes.
Então, boa tarde, boa noite a todo mundo aqui que está presente. Obrigado pela participação de todos. Eu sou o Ernesto, eu sou monitor do Centro de Estudos Judaicos, então vou só introduzir rapidinho aqui o evento. Esse evento é organizado pelo Centro de Estudos Judaicos da Universidade de São Paulo. Então, é um centro que acabou de completar 51 anos, que é uma grande instituição de pesquisa dos estudos judaicos em São Paulo e no Brasil, dentro da USP, que é uma universidade tão importante. E o evento é feito em parceria com o Instituto Brasil-Israel, o IB, que é um instituto que surgiu há poucos anos com o intuito de congregar os setores progressistas da comunidade judaica brasileira. Então, só antes de eu passar a palavra para a Juliana, que vai introduzir o Sayed, eu só queria explicar um pouco o funcionamento aqui da ferramenta. Então, daqui a pouco vai sair minha imagem, os três vão estar conversando e fazendo debate. A gente vai ter um espaço para perguntas do público. Quem estiver acompanhando pelo Zoom, embaixo tem uma opção que tem um Q&A, Questions and Answers. Por ali vocês podem mandar perguntas. E aí, se a gente tiver o tempo, a gente vai poder selecionar algumas perguntas para fazer para o Sayed também. Então, é isso. Agora eu vou passar a palavra para Juliana, que é doutora e pós-doutora pela USP, e também é pesquisadora da obra do Kashua. E é isso. Juliana, o microfone está mutado. Só precisa.
Sorry. Dear Kashua, this is such a pleasure to host you in São Paulo. In the pre-COVID world, to host would sound like a physical attitude, but now it is a virtual welcoming, and my thankful is not less meaningful. This is an event organized by the Jewish Studies Center, which belongs to the University of São Paulo, the most important and biggest university in Brazil. It is supported by IBI, Israel-Brazil Institute, a new organization which congregates different progressive sectors of the Jewish community of São Paulo. Besides being thankful to the center and to the institute, I want to thank Professor Marta Topel, head of the Jewish Studies Center, who immediately agreed to host Kashua. Marta, thank you so much. Marta is a partner in this project, and she will join me in interviewing Kashua. Besides the question that Marta and I will ask Kashua, we invite the public to send us their questions in English or in Portuguese. Someone else is going to translate them to Kashua. Sayed, due to the fact that your work hasn't been translated into Portuguese, at least for the time being, I may add. Most of the people here are not familiar with it. And so our objective is to help bridge that gap. Another point is that most of people in Brazil, and maybe around the world, are acquainted with the Palestinian issue, but not with the Israeli Arab population question. Therefore, I see this meeting's importance in this regard as well. Sayed Kashua is an Israeli Arab or Israeli Palestinian, and by this denomination, among others, I am referring to the non-Jewish Israeli population, which remain in the I'm referring to the non-Jewish Israeli population, which remained in the Israeli territory and to whom Israeli citizenship was conceded after the 1948 war, as well as to their descendants. Nowadays, Arabs constitute around 22% of the total Israeli population. Here are a few words about Sayed Kashua and his work before we start our conversation. Sayed Kashua was born in the Arab town of Tira, Central Israel, in 1975, from a Muslim family. By the age of 12, he was accepted in the most prestigious boarding school in Israel, the High School for Science and Arts in Jerusalem, which is where he had contact with the Jewish population and with the Hebrew language on a daily basis. Afterward, he studied philosophy and sociology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He started his journalistic career writing for the Jerusalem Weekly, Kol Hayir newspaper. For more than 10 years, Kashua had a weekly column in Haaretz newspaper, the most important newspaper in Israel. Kashua has published 4 novels and a 5th book, which compiles some of his writings for Haaretz. He is also the screenwriter for Arab Labor, a satirical sitcom, which was the first time that Arabic-speaking characters made it in the Israeli prime time, and the sitcom, The Screenwriter. In 2014, together with his family, he moved to the US to teach at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Nowadays, he's in the midst of his PhD studies in comparative literature at the Washington University in St. Louis. And at the same university, he teaches Hebrew. Kashua won prizes for his work, which has been translated into several languages, but not to Portuguese yet. Is that right, Kashua? That's your bio?
Almost. It sounds interesting. It sounds more important than I am. It's true that I started here at the University of Washington University teaching also the Hebrew while studying, but I stopped. I taught only the first semester even. So I don't teach anymore.
You don't teach Hebrew anymore?
I don't teach nothing, yeah.
Okay. And may I ask you if your students, they realized they were learning Hebrew with an Arabic accent? Did you tell them?
Yes, they knew that. Yes, it's okay. I usually called my classes advanced Hebrew with Arabic accent. So usually I will tell the students, like, don't go to, how it's called here, Taglit. Taglit, you know, that they take the Jewish students to visit Israel. So I told them, don't try your Hebrew there because they will think you're Palestinians and can end up in jail or something. So
they won't let you in.
No, actually the students were brilliant, but I stopped teaching really because of visa work issues. Nothing to do with the students or with the university. I had to
do you have a student visa nowadays?
No, actually, because I'm working on new projects with I started working with on a project for Sony Pictures in Hollywood, so I had to issue an O1 visa, and then I couldn't also teach on my scholar visa, so that's the official reason why I stopped teaching. So it's to work for studios in the States. I had a different visa.
So the next move is Hollywood.
Yes, I hope so. Yes. Actually, I have a nice contract with Sony, so we will see, for a pilot. So I'm writing a pilot for Sony right now.
Okay, that's so nice. I'm going to ask you one question, all right? One more question. It seems to me that identity is a key notion in your work. Here I'm referring to a more postmodern sense of the word identity, one in which we have a jigsaw puzzle consisting of pieces that don't necessarily add up to something that is coherent. On the contrary, we have contradictory senses of belonging that cannot be reconciled, but they are side by side. You are an Israeli, a Palestinian, an Arab, and now perhaps even a stranger living in a different country. Can you tell us how this combination of identities plays a part in your work? Is writing an attempt to reconcile the incongruent parts?
Are you serious? Yes. Well, yes, that's a very tough question. I think in all my writing, I'm trying to figure out what does identity mean. I don't really have a smart answer. Maybe, usually, at least from where I'm coming from, Israel, Palestine, identity means immediately the national identity, and so you can be blamed for mixing identities between the Israeli and the Palestinian. But as you mentioned, I'm not sure about postmodern. I don't know what post means. I don't know what modern means, and I don't know what postmodern means. But yes, I think that I look at identity from a very complicated point of view. Yes, and I think moving to the States, I have to say it made the identity crisis of my kids much more problematic, because I moved when I'm 40. I'm old enough to deal with identity crisis. I don't care about, I'm not trying to fit in American society. Although I bought a grill gas, but still I don't consider myself American. I'm just a visitor here, a student. For the kids, it's a little bit of a problem, because then there's the Muslim dimension also entered in this equation. So yes, identity is, I think it's a very problematic. I think I'm dealing with it. I don't really have a good answer. What is identity? Sometimes I think that what can define your identity best, and it's really very clear, identity is your bank account. So that tells also a lot about your class identity, at least. And yes, I'm trying with writing to fix that bank account, that identity problem, but it's not really helpful. Writing is not the it's not the right occupation. Sorry for the use of occupation here. The right job to fix your bank account or your identity. So it's a mixture of identities, and they have, yes, of course, and they have always to protect myself, actually, from the identity the one in front of me gives me more than I give myself. Sometimes, is it really self-definition? Did I really wake up in the morning and said, okay, I'm a Muslim, I'm Palestinian, and I want freedom as such? Or my identity was established, I was born into a reality, economical reality, a religious reality, a national reality, being a minority, Palestinian minority in a Jewish state. A lot of fractions of identity. Or is it identity, it's the way I'm treated? Is it identity because Israelis point at me as a minority? I have to protect myself as a minority, and then I react as such, rather than choosing to be a stranger or an alien. So I cannot control much of the identity. I don't know. I don't like to define myself or to think about my identity. So somehow I think I relate to I don't know, an identity of a minority. I have some political thoughts, ideas that maybe also constitute some kind of constructs my identity. And usually I'm trying to hide, to be to be really, not to give away my identity. For example, here in the States, if someone asked me, so where is that accent from? I will say Albania, because most of the people do not know anything about Albania. And so yeah, usually I just escape that.
I agree with you that some parts of our identities are imposed on us, and it means not only when you are a minority, but it's something that you cannot you cannot hide it. It's something that someone else tell you what you are. And there's something, my next question has to do with this imposition, and I'm gonna ask you, it is very difficult for the average Brazilian to understand the conflicts that the Israeli Arabs have to face. One way that I thought of conveying the prejudice that Israeli Arabs face in Israel was to draw a parallel between them and the Blacks in Brazilian society. In Brazil, Blacks have lower education levels than white Brazilians, lower income rates, higher incarceration rates, and they suffer more from police violence, among other kinds of violence. An important difference is that they make up more than 50% of the Brazilian population. Can you talk a bit about the status of the Arab citizens in Israel?
Yes. First of all, I'm sorry for not knowing much about society or political rather than what I hear in the news. And actually, I took a course called Muslims in the Americas, so a little bit. So I'm not familiar. I know a little bit about the national mixture or the situation of Brazil. So forgive me if I'm not relating to another country's social problems or political problems correctly. You know, when we arrived here to the States, my daughter actually now she's in college. She's at home but studying. She should be in college, but now she's home. Told me, "Oh, we are just like the Black African Americans here in the States." And I said, because in 2014 we arrived here, and there were some demonstration protest back. Police killed actually someone in St. Louis, in Ferguson, St. Louis. But it's a little bit. It is very much similar to other persecuted minorities. But I think, you know, there is the physical, the discrimination, but there is also, I think, what is special, I think, about the case of Palestine, Israel, that you are not, you hold a citizenship, but it is a Jewish state. So you cannot be considered, you are not allowed even by law now to have any other nationality rather than the Jewish nationality. The thing is about the state of Israel that it's defined as a Jewish state, as Judaism, as nationalism, not Brazilian or American nationalism, but a religious nationalism. And actually the law of the national state, yes, that was legislated in Israel 2 years ago, means that the only people who can practice their nationality in Israel without even defining what are the borders of the state of Israel, because there are no clear borders, intentionally there are no clear borders for the state of Israel, are the Jewish people. Meaning that any other nationality, meaning Palestinian nationality or Arab nationality, doesn't have a place in the state of Israel. So even so there is that's beside the physical situation that they can talk about and the discrimination. So it's by the definition of the state, Palestinian or Muslim or any not Jewish person cannot really be a full citizen of the state of Israel. and he cannot really enjoy the rights that a Jewish person can enjoy. The State of Israel actually tells our, so it's not about the language or being a nice citizen or being part of the prime time or being part of the Hebrew literature. You are the Arab and you are the Palestinian and you are a threat and you are not an equal citizen of the State of Israel. Basically, the laws of Israel says that if you are Jewish, you don't speak Hebrew, but you were born to a Jewish mother, and you were born in Brazil, for example, you are a citizen of the State of Israel that maybe you never visited, than a Palestinian who was born there, that work there, that pay his taxes there, and that speak the language and write that language. Because it's not meant to be, I would say, a civic society or a state. It's defined as a Jewish state, and that's not just a slogan. It's really that what happens. So basically, most of the Palestinians, I'm not sure about education. I don't know about the black Brazilians that you mentioned. It's the reason maybe there is lower education among Palestinians. I'm not sure that it's true. It's basically the infrastructure and the money that the government puts in Arab school compared to the ones that you invest in Jewish education. So basically the Arabs in Israel are 20%, and if I'm not wrong, they live on something like 2% of the land of Israel. So, and they live in ghettos in the State of Israel. There are laws that forbids Arabs from living or renting houses or buying houses in most of the land of Israel then owned by the state, which is more than 90%. So they have committees, in kibbutzim and moshavim that actually were built for not to allow Arab to live there. So basically, you are forced to live in the place that you were born in, and that's not. I cannot talk about even one hospital that was built in Arab town or city. I cannot talk about any governmental factory that was built in Arab town and city since 1948. Yes, and we are citizens in Israel. Since 1948, not even one Arab town or village was established for Arabs in Israel. And we are talking about more than 700 Israeli settlements, Jewish-only settlements were built for Jewish people. I'm not talking about settlements in the West Bank. I'm talking about moshavim and the towns for Israelis inside Israel. So there are two factors here. One of the definition of the State of Israel and Judaism, and the other one is the discrimination, the systemic discrimination against not Jewish people in the State of Israel. So yes, it's complicated, I think.
And when you say that they represent a threat to the state, you said a threat.
A threat?
You use this word that Arabs represent a threat to the Jewish state.
A threat, yes.
A threat.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, a threat. So what do you mean by a threat? Do you mean like it's an imagined threat? It's a symbolic threat. Can you just say a few words about how do you see this threat? The way
first of all, that it's imagined, yes, it doesn't make it less real. No, it's, threat, the Arabs can be, in most of the cases, at least from the point, I'm not talking about personal threats. I'm talking about from the governmental point of view, the Israeli government point of view, the Arabs are considered a demographic problem. We have to make sure of our Jewish majority in the State of Israel, and Arabs, yes. The imagined part, or I don't know if it's imagined or not, but I can clearly say that since 1948, the majority of, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's a fact that from the security point of view, Arabs are almost never participated, they never took part in the Palestinian national movement, and it's really, really rare and to not happen at all that they joined the anti-Israeli military activities. But from the Israeli point of view, it is very, very orientalistic view that the Arab cannot be trusted, that they behave accordingly because we have the force. As soon as they will have the opportunity, they will stab you in the back. You can work with the Arab, but you can never fully trust him. There is something primitive in the Arab that you cannot trust, you know. So yes, it is a national threat, a demographic threat, and they use it as demographic threats. We are talking about ministers and in the government and like Lieberman and others that use the word cancer describing the Arab citizens. Yes, I'm not talking about even the Palestinians in the West Bank. By the way, one of the major differences between being a minority in America or in Brazil, or even the discriminated, the persecuted majority, as you mentioned, more than 50%, is the fact that the Palestinians are not immigrants, and also you cannot really disconnect the history of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Arab Israelis in '48, they are part of, or they are the remains, yes, of what was Palestine. So we have the same families that became refugees and live in West Bank and Gaza and refugee camps in Lebanon. So it started with the same Palestinian situation, the same Palestinian cause, which is also adds a different dimension to the whole equation of Israel-Palestine and identity and what's the meaning of a national threat or a demographic threat.
And my next question is related to this tragic status of the Arab in the Israeli society. Despite this tragedy, this tragic status, your work is permeated with humor and irony. I know that sometimes I've told you many times that I see humor in some parts of your work, and you said, really, I don't think it's funny. I think it's only tragic. So maybe there is a difference between the ones who read your work and you writing your own work. But I think that your work is embedded with a tragic approach to the world. And as I told you once, a long time ago, it reminds me of the Yiddish sense of humor, in which the aim of is to laugh at oneself. And I told you that, and you told me that you read lots of books from you were aware of this Yiddish sense of humor. You read it. Do you think humor plays an important role in your writing? Is it an intentional choice to use this tragic humor when you create your characters?
Yes. Humor is it's a big problem. First of all, about Yiddish, that was actually my dream, or some of my characters' dream, to be recognized as Ashkenazi Jews. I think that yes, I am. Yeah, I really loved reading Shalom Aleichem and Mendele, Mocher Sfarim, and Besheves Zinger. I translated, not directly in Yiddish. So I like that, but I think one of the major differences between the Yiddish writing and my writing in this sense is Yiddish was the humor. The immediate audience are the Yiddish speakers, readers, which means the Jewish communities. It was a little bit complicated because even if I was using that humor, but it was written in Hebrew. So I was asking myself, and many other critics were asking also. So it's not self-humor. It is self-humor, but it's addressing the majority. It's addressing the rulers. It's addressing mainly the Hebrew readers because it was originally written in the Hebrew language. So it makes it in this political, national that we talked about. I don't really conflict. Usually it's called the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but conflict sometimes sounds like, a conflict between neighbors. So I don't know if conflict is the right word. But this very violent relationship between Palestinians and Israelis. So I love humor, and I think for many years actually I miss humor a lot, and of course I intentionally used humor, and I was really basing my idea of the use of humor. I think I learned it, especially that I'm addressing the readers of Israeli newspapers and viewers of the Israeli commercial TV, because I write in Hebrew. So the use of humor, I was using it unfortunately to humanize the Palestinian character. Again, for the Israelis, they are not used to read an Arab-Palestinian author, and also they're not used to see in their primetime commercial TV Arab characters. So it was a tough mission, and they knew that they have to use a lot of humor that they like using. I thought a lot. There is a sentence that the humor is the weapon of the weak. So I use that. Okay, I am here, the minority. I am the weak. I don't have the power, and I'm going to use that humor to address political issues. So I was using the humor to gain the trust of the Israeli viewer, and then to tell him a very sad story, a political, social story. So I start with humor to tell a more difficult, complicated story. Humor as to capture the audience, to make him listen to me. But then I think when I grew up, and because of the political situation just went worse, and I think that the peak was in 2014 with the war in Gaza, that I couldn't stay. I had to leave. Is that this sentence, that the humor is the weapon of the weak, actually means that I accept being the weak. The use of humor, maybe in this sense, means that I'm taking the role of the weak. So I started to think about humor in a different way. It just accept that position of the weak. So I don't know, when are you allowed to use humor and when not? I miss humor a lot, but wasn't that entertaining the Israelis? We're talking here about occupation in the West Bank. We're talking about discrimination. We're talking about, since the year 2000, really just getting worse. And the government is just getting, in Israel, I mean, more right wing. So what is the taste of humor? Is humor really necessary in such situations? It is very, very different from the Yiddish humor. I love humor, and I think that there is something powerful in humor when it's internal humor. Even during the Shoah, the Holocaust, Jewish people used humor to humanize their life, to make life a little bit bearable in this unbelievable murderous situation. Yes, but the humor addressed to the ruler can be very, very tough, can be very, very difficult, and make me think a lot about my use of humor. Am I here accepting my inferiority? Should I be the clown entertaining? With all due respect, with my political says or whatever they are, they were very heavy questions, especially during war times. It is ridiculous to write humor when there's a war going on and people are killed. So it was not easy to write humor. So of course, most of the columns, because it's weekly columns, it doesn't always to be humoristic when there's a war. So it reflects the situation, and most of the tours were the columns, were a little bit more tragic and more political. But when you shoot a TV show, you don't know what's going to happen when they broadcast it. And sometimes it's ridiculous to have this neurotic Arab character when people are killed. So humor is a very, how you say, a sword with two sides. How you say that? Kherev pepiyot, how you say? You know what I mean? So I don't know about humor. I miss it a lot, and I hope that I can write humor that doesn't that deals with identity, but maybe not directly with Palestine, Israel. We'll see.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to invite Professor Marta Topel now to ask you some questions. Is that all right?
Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is a very, very jolly occasion for all of us especially for members of the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of São Paulo, and for those who live in Israel and read you at Haaretz on Shabbat, watched episodes of Avodah David, and read some of your novels. It is really a great pleasure. In fact, when I told my friends in Israel that we would interview you, they wanted me to ask you if you are going to write again in Haaretz. I think that given the political situation in Israel these last few years, no one has dared to ask whether you have plans to return. I forgot to thank you, Juliana, for inviting me to be part of this interesting and challenging conversation. So, Sayed Kashua, my first question has to do with the novel Guf Sheni Yachid, which I am reading with extreme interest right now. I am almost ending it. The question relates to the choice of Hebrew in a very particular situation among the Arab characters when they speak to each other. It would seem that your job is a bit of a translator, isn't it? To the Arab audience, this may sound a little artificial. How does it work?
Well, yes, it's true. I have to say that sometimes I do use a lot of, I mix a lot of Arabic in my Hebrew writing sometimes. I don't know the meaning of really, if we say that something is artificial, so we think that there is something natural and realistic about language. So I think I'm translating, even now I'm talking to you as, so I'm translating something, I don't know, thoughts. I'm not sure that I think in Hebrew and translate them. So maybe the whole thing is just a process of some kind of translation. There's nothing that like pure language, but you're right. I felt much more comfortable writing scripts because unlike novels that you cannot write bilingual novels, although in the last one I did entered some pages in Arabic with no translation in the last novel track changes. Well, it was just you cannot really write a bilingual book or trilingual book. That means that only Palestinian citizen of Israel that
yes.
can read the book and, I want to sell books, I think. So that's a problem. So in TV, you write the characters, and so the Israelis speak Hebrew and the Arabs speak Arabic, and they write the exact dialect, the Palestinian dialect. But in books, yes. But it was not such a. So it is in that sense artificial, but it was not. It did not bother me that much. I think it is delivering some kind of idea and or a story or a feeling through writing. The question of the language, actually, some people would accuse me of being artificial just because of the use of the Hebrew, not to talk about Arab characters speaking in Hebrew.
Yes, I know.
But yes, you're right, and that's what happens. So I cannot write a book in which each character speaks its own language yet, but maybe one day. So.
Thank you very much. In Israel, you were a public persona who played an important role involving Arab culture in the country, at least in the media, especially with the TV program Avodah David. That show was a groundbreaker as the first sitcom featuring mainly Arab characters speaking in Arabic on Israeli prime time. You were certainly a pioneer. Do you think that in spite of Israeli society's movement to the right, the status of the Arabic language is changing in Israel in the last years? This would be just one more example of the country's typical contradictions. As in recent years, Arabic language has featured in more and more TV series.
Like which TV series you're talking about?
There is one about, well, now you caught me.
There is Fauda. That's,
Oh, Fauda, yes. No, but there is another one in Can Hadesre, Can 11. I will have to check
yes.
it.
Yes.
But
Yes.
some
Muna.
friends of me in Israel told me that they are watching this
Yes.
series. Maybe I'm not enough updated.
Yes, no, you're right. You're right. There is a one in Cannes that's called Mona.
Mona, exactly. Yes.
Yes. Yes. I think that the question of the status of the Arabic language in Israel, it's a very big question. It's a very problematic question. And first of all, I would like to say that Arab labor, it's true, it was the first in prime time since Channel 2 started. But in Channel 1 in Israel, that was like the governmental TV, actually the original idea of establishing in 1967 the Israeli TV was actually to be solely in Arabic, to some kind of threat and propaganda to the Arab world. So actually there was a very, very popular sitcom called the Masada Agdola, the big restaurant, that was only in Arabic or mostly in Arabic. It's true that the word Arab or Palestinian or Israel was never mentioned. It was in that show. Yes, it was some kind of a sitcom that I really loved when I was a kid. Now I cannot watch it. But no one talked about politics, nothing about Arabs and Israelis.
Yes.
There is a group of Arab workers in a restaurant kitchen, and the boss is the only Jewish Egyptian, I think, originally, but it's in Arabic. But nothing political. So, and I have to say that the Israelis were very, very familiar with the Egyptian movie. That was really a cultural institution every Friday, and people were addicted to it. So let us not forget, actually, that when we speak about Arabic and about its sad, I think, status in Israel, let's not forget that maybe 50% of the Jewish in Israel now coming from Muslim and Arab states, you know, Iraqi Jews and Egyptians and Moroccan and Algerian and whatever, especially after the establishment of the state in Yemen, they are Arabs. That's the language and that's their culture. They had to, assimilate and adapt to the Zionist and to the Hebrew language and to the concept of language in Israel, rejecting the past and start a new life. But they were Arabs. So for most of the Israelis, I'm not talking about second or third generation, but Arabic was part of their culture. Unfortunately, there is a wonderful book that I love, actually, by Yoni Mendel, who wrote about the status of Arabic language and how actually the Arabic language in Israel, in its the education system, the Ministry of Education and the education system militarized the Arabic. And the only way it's respected and acceptable among Israeli Jews is from the military point of view. So usually in high school, you study Arabic if you want to be in the intelligent. And also the whole concept, Fauda, for example, how we accept Fauda, you know, it's this Israeli soldiers becoming Arabs to enter towns, again, from the military point of view. And that's very sad because that's how you learn Arabic, and that's the status from the Israeli point of view. Sadly, the Arabic language is under attack. It used to be, since the mandate and before that, a formal language in Israel. Again, with the new laws of the government legislated probably 2 years ago, with as part of Israel as a Jewish nation state only, was undergrading, not upgrading, so downgrading the status of Arabic to be an important, but no longer, Arabic language is no longer a formal language in Israel. One of the sad things about Arabic language in Israel, there are no publishing houses and no libraries, almost at all, not to talk about the sad academic situation of Arabic language in Israel, because there is such a thing like an Arab university or Arabic university, an issue that was raised many times, a demand to create an Arab university in Israel. So no, There are some TV shows. It's really very rare TV shows, I would say. Surely not 20% of the language that you hear in the Israeli TV is in Arabic. Arabic is used again, like in TV shows. Still, Arabic is the language of the sadly of the enemy. Arabic is legitimate to use in TV when we talk about soldiers and military. And I'm not saying, because there are a group of people who are trying to fight against that. So this book that I'm talking here about Yoni Mendel and others, and some Iraqi Jewish third generation or second generation of Iraqi Jewish writers who try to revive the Arabic language or the importance of Arabic language to the Mizrahi Jews. So there are different efforts to do something about Arabic language, translation and teaching and yeah, so many people now do study. So that's the formal thing, that's the governmental attitude. But there are a lot of groups, actually, I see that many young people try to study Arabic and the spoken Arabic. So two contradictory things, yes, as you mentioned.
Yes, as in Israel it's so common to see contradictions all the time.
Yes.
In relation to what you have told us, I watched a program conducted by Eric Zinger, and he showed two interesting initiatives related to the Arabic language. One of it is the Anulpan in Haifa for Arabic, and the other one is a mixed origin group of Arabic Hebrew translators eager to heal what they consider to be a political and linguistic error: the fact that Arabic literature translated into Hebrew was always done by Jewish translators. This group, it's a group created by Professor Yoshua Shenhav at Tel Aviv University, with translators, Jewish and Arab translators, to translate Arabic literature to Hebrew literature, because they think that all the translations from Arabic to Hebrew we have in Israel were made by Jewish translators. So they want to correct a mistake that they think is political and also epistemological in some sense. What do you think about these initiatives? They are very small. What do you think about them?
I think they are very. I think that you mean Professor Yuda Shenhav and the Van Leer Institute. They're working on. They're wonderful. I just received yesterday a book translated actually by one of them, and they do send me the books translated by, again, this young man that I talked about his book. Yoni Mendel is there and is with them, with this group of translators. So Professor Yuda Shenhav is really a unique. I love his work and he's great, and he calls himself actually Arab Jew, Arab Jewish. So that's what I was talking about. So again, what is translated by Jewish? Yes, we are talking about, I don't know, 40-30% of the Israelis Arabic. It's their mother tongue. Yehuda Shenhav himself of Iraqi origins.
Yes.
And I think, you know what? I think that if I'm not wrong, Mahmoud Darwish poetry was trying to, well, probably the most important poet. I think that at least the newer ones were translated by Muhammad Hamza Ghanaim, who's in Palestinian Israeli. I think that Emil Habibi was translated by Anton Shammas, who's still a Palestinian. I mean, usually the idea is to translate from, the translator should be of the target language. But in this case, the Palestinians in Israel, just myself, I guess, I don't want to translate more than I need. But the language can at least be their stepmother tongue, like Anton Shammas and Muhammad Hamza Ghanaim, that they can translate to the Hebrew as the target, because really they're very fluent. And So I'm not sure about that. So I think that what they talk about, it's more probably older, some kind of Orientalist way of translation. And sometimes maybe so about so I read these articles that, for example, Najib Mahfouz, the Egyptian Nobel Prize winner, was translated in an Orientistic way to show that the Arabs are inferior. But I guess that this group of people are doing a really wonderful job, and I'm in touch with them, and I love this group a lot, and I think that they're complicating the whole understanding of Hebrew and language, and the mixture and the hybridity of the Arabic and Hebrew, and the revival of the Hebrew written in Arabic by Jewish scholars and other Arab Jewish good writers. So yes, I think it's a wonderful group, and I think that they are doing a great job.
Okay, I have one last question. An uncle of mine once told me that our fascists are always more painful to us than other people's fascists. If that's true, and I think it is, I could imagine that in spite of this, it must be difficult for you to live in the United States right now with a government hostile to immigrants. And speaking of immigrants, we immigrants generally approach people who are more like us, Latin Americans, Russians, and Ethiopians in Israel, Hispanics in Brazil, for example. What role, if any, do Jewish Israelis living in the United States have in your reference groups?
Oh, that's so your uncle told you that our fascists are more
painful. We complain more about our fascists. We suffer more. We are more angry with them than with other ones that are far away.
Yes, but now I really don't know who are my fascists. I really don't know. Is it the situation here? I don't have yet a green card, so there is no fascism at all in America. It's really, really wonderful place to live. There is no racism. Equality is just great here. In Israel, no, I'm just kidding. Or the dictatorships in the Arab world, are they also? I have a lot of fascists, or the Israeli extreme right wing. I don't know. No, we live in a very scary situation, I think, globally. Unfortunately, yeah, I'm just again opening the maps and looking for another destination to move, and I have no idea where to. Yeah, the Canada is really leading, but I don't want to ruin them, because I have a feeling if we move there, it's going to it's going to be bad. So I really don't know. I have no idea.
Maybe Germany. Yeah, not kidding.
I don't know. I'm not sure that I can handle, first of all, a new language.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want to do that to my kids. Maybe just go back to Jerusalem, to Tiro. It's tough, and the coronavirus situation here made it even tougher. And to be honest, I don't have many social life here. I don't have many friends. But you're right. Most of my friends here are of they are Americans, because again, the definition of American, they are American citizenship. But most of my friends here, mainly in Urbana-Champaign, that I had wonderful relationship, wonderful community there. Usually there were few, like what we call the pure American, or whatever that means. Yes, they all of them. But yes, they have they are either immigrants themselves, or sons and daughters of immigrants, including Jewish people. That was absolutely true. Like the people that offered me the teaching position first for 1 year in the University of Lyon, Illinois, was the Jewish studies there.
Israelis, Jewish.
Yeah, it was Matti Bunzel and Michael Rothberg. Now he's in UCLA, but he was in Champaign. And then my boss was Brett Kaplan. So yes, and I think that also here in Washington University, I think the more progressive, I would say, yes. In America, there are different groups of political groups of Jewish people. So, but I'm very often invited to Reformic and synagogues to give talks and Shabbats and stuff like that. And yeah, I think so. Sometimes there are the very militant pro-Zionist, but usually they are not on campuses, so it's okay. But so yes, there is this feeling that it's much comfortable to make friends with people who know the experience and know the meaning of being a minority. So yes, I guess you're right about that.
They told me that I have time to ask you one more question. And it's still related to the United States. How do you stand in relation to political figures like Democratic Representative Rashida Tlaib, who supports the boycott of Israel? And do you believe that the BDS could be an effective instrument for the change of Israel's policy toward the Palestinians?
You don't have time to ask that question.
Oh, okay. Okay, if you don't feel
first of all, there's a law in Israel that you cannot support the boycott. It's a very complicated question, to be honest, because thinking about the idea of boycott, if we talk about like what is the BDS? If I'm not wrong, they are calling of boycotting Israel until occupation ends and equality in the state of Israel for the Palestinians in Israel, and solving the refugees problem. Something that I think goes hand in hand with the international law. I'm not talking about the figures playing there. I'm talking about the idea. Regarding the Democratic, really, I'm not familiar with her at all. I think that's I don't know her. She was in the news because of her grandmother or not grandmothers that she did a mistake. Yes. That was an amateur mistake to say I'm going to visit, because that's not knowing that Israel, of course, will say, of course, you're welcome to visit your grandmother. So that was a mistake. But the BDS is a very, very complicated issue, especially when it comes to a Palestinian citizen in Israel writing in Hebrew. And sadly, I was sometimes... So there is a difference between their idea and the way that some of the people active there do not accept any other idea. But the idea of non-violent resistance to occupation and inequality, again, there's a law in Israel that you're not supposed to support boycott, so I'm not supporting it because really you can serve time in jail based on that law. But still, it's very complicated, especially for Palestinians in Israel. Some artists are accused immediately of being collaborators with Israel for really very natural things. So if it can help, no. I think that it's in a symbolic level. It's frustrating that it's not helping, because when I see that the Palestinian Authority still has its military cooperation with Israel, when I look at Saudi Arabia and the Emirates signing contracts, when I look at big companies having deals, really, so that's I don't see that it's helpful. I don't think that we live in a political, both the United States, both the Arab nations, and both the Europeans, they can criticize a little, but I don't see, sadly, any international forces now that can help the Palestinian case. And it seems like Israel can continue basically to do whatever. Again, Israel, I mean the Israeli government now of Bibi Netanyahu, can do whatever they want in the West Bank and Gaza. Jerusalem as a capital, yes. Building more settlements, yes. Destroying houses of Palestinians, taking other villages. They really can do whatever. To annex or not to annex, it's up to their decision. So I don't see any force that can stop Israel. Not a Palestinian local one, though the Palestinians, you know, with their very humble abilities, try their demonstrations on a daily basis. But sadly, like as I said, globally we're going to dark phases. I'm afraid that includes also Israel-Palestine.
Okay, so it's a very complicated, complex, and sad situation. I thank you. Yes, excuse me.
No, it is sad. Yeah, we could have talked about, you know, alcohol and cinema, and it would have been. It's difficult to be funny talking about Israel Palestine.
No, yes, you're sure, of course.
Or fascism.
Thank you very much. I think that now Ernesto will open our set to the public. I see that there are many questions. So, Ernesto.
So, Sayed, please, can you, many people are asking very interesting questions.
Yes.
You can read them all, okay? They are all open. And
well, in the Q&A?
Yes, Q&A, yes, you can read on open, okay. And I think, I know that it's a tough question, but I would like you to choose some of them, maybe 3 or 4 that you could read and answer. Would you do that?
Can you do that instead of me? I see a lot of questions, so I don't want to.
Okay, so would you like me to read for you some of the questions? Yeah.
Yes, in the Q&A, yeah, you want.
Okay. So one question is, why isn't the protagonist in Dancing Arabs named?
Oh, wasn't he?
No.
I don't know. Maybe because it was written in first. I have a problem with names, I have to say. Maybe because it's written in first person. I guess, you know, and it was not nice to call him Said or Said or whatever. So yeah, you know. But the idea of names, it's really, you know, some people would say the unnamed character, just to not give him, but it's clear that he's an Arab and Palestinian. I guess the main, yeah, I think it's only because it's just written in first person.
Okay. There is a question, what do really the Palestinians want?
Sports cars and money and a good hamburger. I think really the basic, the Palestinian, yes, the Palestinian movement, or at least the official. I don't know what exactly each Palestinian wants, but I think that I will be right to say that that a solution, you know, a national solution. I think that most of the Palestinians know very well how complicated the situation is, and they think that the majority of the Palestinians accepted painfully the idea of establishing a Palestinian state next to Israel in the West Bank and Gaza, and that did not really work well since 2000, just disappointment. I think to live in dignity, to have a passport that allows them to travel, to stop being discriminated all over the world, not only in Israel, Palestine, but also, you know, the situation of the refugees, the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and Syria and around the world is is not, it's really miserable. So I think that generally speaking, yes, it's just really the basic of some kind of a national. I'm not a huge believer in nationalism, of course, but of course you cannot ignore the fact that you need to be nationalist in order to reject it at one point. So I guess yes, some kind of independence, some kind of a national solution to live in peace, to make good living. To be freed, I think. If it's one state, two states, I'm not sure. I'm no longer sure if it matters that much. If they can afford not being discriminated, not being kicked from their houses, being treated like enemy, being killed. Yeah. So I think some kind of good living. Really the basic demands as any human being. The Palestinian in Israel, that's, I think, the official and the demand, I can tell you. I never heard any leader talking about freeing Palestine or whatever. They want equality in the state of Israel. They want to be accepted as equal citizens in the state of Israel. That's it. So there are different groups of Palestinians, though the solution should be for all what people call the Palestinian question, but sometimes solution to different groups can even that work. The Palestinian in Gaza want an access to the sea and to the border and to living and to communication. They're surrounded by walls. The Palestinians in Syria probably have, I'm not allowed even, I'm not in the position to talk about the needs of different groups of Palestinians. Yeah, so each group needs different things and immediate things. Yes.
So I'm gonna add something to this answer that you have just gave. The way you create your characters, their ambivalence, their internal struggles, as you are showing right now, even their will to sound like someone else through their name, their appearance, their accent, their aims, are what, in my view, make your work so political without being propaganda. Did you understand my question? Did you understand what I put?
No, it's written here?
No.
Oh.
It's not written here, but it has to do with how do you create your plots? So I'm going to ask this question, okay? Syed, when you start writing a novel, what is the initial trigger, an idea, a character, a fact? Your work has a spontaneous feeling to it, a sense that characters have some autonomy, which of course is not true. Do you plan your novels in detail before you start, or does it come to you as you write?
I don't have maps for the novels. I do have where I want to take my characters, and sometimes it's a feeling, really. I'm sorry that I talk a little bit of cliches. Writing for TV, yes, I have a plan, but in writing the novels, no. It's just I know what is the path. For example, I can say that second person singular was more than anything else, maybe this insecure and jealousy of this lawyer that drove me to write that. That was the premise and the theme. But I went with the lawyer and with Amir every day, every single day. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And I don't know what is going to happen in the end. Sometimes when I'm asked why you write, I say I really want to know what happens in the end. And you asked me if in writing there is some kind of how you say reconcile. So maybe it's an escapism. Writing for me, it's some kind of making logic. I control the plot. I'm supposedly I control the plot, but there is something running away to other characters' problems. Yes, so it's not me. It's the lawyer's wife who cheats on him. I'm fine. My wife is great, I think. So no, I don't really plan it, but of course I think about it, and I know that I have a good story when before I go to sleep, I just think about the characters and what is going to happen to them next morning and next step. So I plan just very, very partly, but just the beginning, just to know the path that I want to take the characters. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not work. But that's the way I write. I have no idea. And Let It Be Morning, is that me? Oh, no. In Let It Be Morning, I had no idea how it's going to end. So I start with a fear of being displaced, feeling of refugeehood. I think in the first novel, that was also some kind of fragmented emotions and memories and feelings. As if you read it, you know that nothing was planned there. But it's, yeah, so no real plan. I have no idea what's going to happen next morning to the characters.
Thank you. Another question of the public. Can you tell a little about your studies? What are you studying in your PhD? Can you tell us?
Yes, I just finished actually 2 years of coursework, because in America, and like, you have to make also coursework. So I'm just done, and I'm just now have a committee, and it seems that I'm going to be writing about the post 2000 Palestinian literature as world literature. I know it sounds, so I'm going to, be focusing on post-colonial studies, world literature, translation theory, immigration studies. We'll see. But I don't know. But if this project with Sony works, I think I'm going to run away from the university. I had enough, and it's ruining my writing. One of the things that happens to you if you read post-colonial studies is, well, there is no escape. Everything that I'm going to write is going to be exotics, helping the neo-colonial world, and so I don't know. There's no way that a Palestinian can write something meaningful unless he writes like in a language that no one understands, to no people at all. So I don't know. No, but I enjoy very much my studies. I don't know, maybe it was a big mistake, but I had to know what academy people do. So it's okay. But I was always a bad student, so it's okay. It's not really ruining my life. I still focus more on studies. I'm no way. I'm studying because I'm really out of interest. It's interesting. I'm not sure that I'm planning an academic career. Probably if I'm going to teach something or go back to teaching, I hope it's going to be teaching creative writing or cinema, like screenwriting, and
which
really
you've done already, right? You taught creative writing, right?
That's right. In the University of Illinois, I taught 4 years. I was teaching the advanced Hebrew classes with Arabic accent, and and the screenwriting classes. It was fun. And then I moved here because it was a mixture. In Washington University, they have a plan called PhD track in comparative literature for international writers. So it's a very nice title.
Here we have an interesting comment. We read Dancing Arabs in the course Israeli Stories at the University of Haifa.
Yeah, so you should
person
leave the
from
university.
The public wrote here.
Move to a better university. No, it's great. I'm glad to hear that. No, University of Haifa is a great place. So.
I have a little question. Do you miss your Israeli audience from the readers from your column at Aretz? Because nowadays we have the reactions of the public. And sometimes I remember lots of reactions to your column. So do you miss this kind of touch or exchange with the Israeli audience?
I miss many things. Mainly my immediate family, my friends. The comments on Haaretz, no. Probably that was one of the reasons that
yes.
that helped
Yes. I
me
understand you. Yes, I know
leaving that.
what you are referring to.
No, the reason that I stopped writing for arts, it's very complicated. I think I worked there, not I think, 13, 14 years. So it was difficult anyway to write a weekly column, and I couldn't forgive myself when I felt a week that I didn't have something important. So that was one dimension of it. I really couldn't. I really didn't want people to be bored with my writing. And then also I tried for maybe 2 or 3 years being in the States, and I felt it's no longer the same thing as being in Israel. You know,
Yes.
I think that I wrote about everything in Urbana-Champaign during the 3 years, and I thought that it has. And this column had like a very specific something there. I think now I lived enough in the States that maybe I can, you know, if I look at it differently, to establish a new column, that might happen. I don't know how much money artists have to offer me at all, but I do write. I do write sometimes. Sometimes even I wrote very, very few things, humoristic things for the website of the New York Review of Books about the coronavirus that was published a few in May. I wrote just for this, just yesterday, I wrote a piece for Ideot Ochronot that asked me a piece for the holidays. So I do write also short stories once a while in the spirit of the column. There were some stories published. So I do that, but it was tough. It's really very difficult to write a weekly column and to be good all the time. It's not that I'm saying I was good all the time, but I felt like I'm losing it. And I really needed the money. It's not like that was my job in the Reshet Shoken since I was 23, since 1996, 21. I worked with Reshet Shoken, so that was the steady income. It was a very painful decision to leave. But, you know, as I always say, it took me 12 years to realize that a weekly column comes every week. And, and it's not easy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one more question, which is actually my supervisor, Professor Nancy Rosenchef. She's the one who's asking you this question. If you have reviewed your writing published in Israel, and I will add, how does your moving to the US impact in your view on the Israeli society and on your writings, as she asked you?
Can you repeat that again?
Have you reviewed your writings published in Israel since you moved to the US?
If I reviewed?
Yeah, like in a critical review, I mean, like,
yeah.
Do you regret writing something? Do you think you should have written in another way? Would you today, as you are, put in another way what you've written?
No, I think that and I'm being very honest. I regretted everything that I wrote, including living in Israel. I was rethinking and reviewing and thinking about it while living there. It's not like that suddenly I moved and started. It was a process. It's because of the political situation, you know, and rethinking the value of that work. Probably many things I just would not. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe I will. I'm not sure. I think that I'm. No, I think that I'm proud of most of the things that I've written. But and it's nothing to do with moving. I was, you know, if it was not this thing that rethinking the language and the challenge and the pain in writing and regretting writing, maybe I wouldn't write. I need that. I need the challenge. I need to feel guilty about writing. I need to feel guilty about the use of the Hebrew. I need to find, and Hebrew, it's not, I don't write in Hebrew because I think my Hebrew is brilliant or whatever, but I cannot afford but writing in Hebrew. I don't know, challenging it, I don't know, beating me, try to be part of it. I don't know, maybe try to reject myself from it. So it's the whole process. I cannot now review or regret to realize differently. It's just that's the academic job that I'm trying to do my best not to be part of. So I'm thinking about thinking about my writing, and I don't know. That's the meaning of reviewing. Is am I answering the right question at all? Or I'm right?
Actually, the question is not mine. It's Nancy Rosenchan's question, but I understand what you are saying. I get it very, yeah, I see.
Yeah, I think I will, if writing would be not frustrating and not confusing and so not something that I'm going to regret, maybe I will do something else. Not sure what, but probably, I don't know. Uber, I will be an Uber driver. I need a visa, a different visa for that.
And not in the pandemic, not an Uber driver in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Here we have an interesting question from the Daniel Strum. Lucia Harris doesn't have an accent in Hebrew or Arabic. Can that be the face of a future culture or society?
No.
No. Okay. Yes, it's a... Juliana.
The future society that I imagine is to have different accents and different languages and to be accepted. The different society that imagines that an Arabic accent in prime commercial TV, it's not going to be only a target for mimicry and laughter. The community that imagine, yes, you're not supposed to be ashamed of your Arabic accent or your Arabic language in primetime commercial TV, and that will be respected. The community that imagine that you don't have, even as a Mizrahi Jew, to speak exactly the Ashkenazi hegemonic language in order to have a platform in TV or on Israeli society, that all accents should be respected. All languages should be respected, and not to, yeah. So I don't know. I always say that I write in Hebrew in Arabic accent, not only speak in Arabic accent.
Thank you very much. You were very assertive, and I agree with you. Humbly, I agree with you that this is a nice future to imagine or to fight for.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
It's almost 7:30, Juliana. So maybe we are arriving to the end of this fascinating conversation. I would like to thank you again and again very, very much for being with us here in Brazil. I hope your books will be translated soon into Portuguese. I want to share them with some friends who cannot read Hebrew, and maybe Juliana has something more to ask you or to say. So thank you for the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of São Paulo and the IBI, the Israeli-Brazil Institute. Thank you very, very much for being so generous and being with us. So, toda rabah.
Toda lachem. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. I hope that I somehow helped and there was not too much. Thank you so much, Juliana. Thank you so much, Marta. It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Sayed, thank you so much. It was a big pleasure. Thank you.
It
was great. Thank you.
Thanks. Keep in touch. Bye-bye. Bye, Juliana.